Hey guys, welcome to the Out Jeeping YouTube channel. My name's Austin, and today's video we're going to be replacing the old aluminum steering box spacer with a high quality 1/4-inch steel steering spacer from Ars Fabrication. So let's get started. Alright, so to start off, this is our steering box spacer that we're going to be replacing here on my 99 Jeep Cherokee. If you guys don't know necessarily what it is, basically it spaces out the steering box away from the frame about an inch or so, as you can see right here. And the original one is actually made of aluminum, and it's not as big. It basically just has links that connect all three of these holes right here. And if you put bigger tires on your Jeep, that puts more stress on it, and a lot of times they actually crack and you might have some play in your steering. So to prevent that in the future, I'm actually just going to be replacing it here today. So I got this from Ars Fabrication, and I actually got it off eBay for only about 30 bucks, which is actually a pretty good deal. It does come bare steel, so we'll have to paint that real quick, but I'll put a link in the description below and where you can find this. On their website they actually list it for 55 bucks, so it's kind of a steal to buy it over on eBay. Another thing that's different compared to the old spacer is we got this extra hole right here, and this actually utilizes an empty hole that's on your frame. So basically you can put another bolt through the frame, and it helps keep the steering spacer in place so that way it won't move around and you'll have nice firm contact against the frame rail. And this steering spacer is all 1/4-inch steel, as you can see, and they did machine this all into the plate here, and they welded in some DOM tubing, so this thing is nice and strong. Alright, so another thing I did right away is I actually went to the hardware store and got some new bolts for this. These right here are 7/16 UNC, and then we just got a 1/2-inch bolt. They're all roughly 4 inches long, and they should work for bolting on the steering box spacer. The reason why I went with some new hardware is because I've actually done a couple of these swaps before, and these bolts actually like to snap off, and they don't really get seized up in the steering box that much, but what they do get seized up is in that old aluminum spacer, and they just kind of snap off in there. Because as you know, if you have steel up against aluminum, they like to corrode against each other, and trying to get those off could be a nightmare. So having it snap is actually not too bad. You should be able to then thread them out from the rest of the steering box spacer, and then we can install our new hardware. So to get started, I'm going to go and paint this right away. I'm just going to throw some primer on there and throw some black paint, and then while that's drying, we'll go and remove our old steering spacer and get it all ready to install the new one. Alright, so looking in the driver's side wheel well up here in the front, you can see along the frame rail we actually have the bolts that go into the steering box, and we got one that's nice and exposed here, another one a little bit further back, and then one up there behind this plastic piece. Alright, so to get at all the bolts nicely, I'm just going to take this wheel well liner and just kind of undo a few clips and then kind of bend it back over here so that way it's out of the way. At the same time, I'm going to take the engine mat that's underneath the engine and do the same thing, unclip it from underneath so that way we can see the bottom of the steering box. Alright, so looking underneath the vehicle here, as you can see, this is our steering box, and it's bolted to the frame. You can see the end of one of the bolts right here. There's another one that might be kind of hard to see, but it's behind this pitman arm. And then we got another one located on top of the box. You can't really see the other side unless you look down from the engine bay and remove the electric fan. So while I'm down here, I'm just going to take a little bit of PB Blaster, spray it on these exposed threads that are over here. and that way hopefully it should be able to break free a little bit, but I'm anticipating the bolts to actually snap, so we'll just have to see what happens. So when we unbolt this, we're not actually going to be removing the box completely from the vehicle. We're just basically going to have it unbolted from the frame, and then it's just going to lay down here onto the sway bar. So I'm going to keep everything attached, like the steering lines, pitman arm, and the tie rod setup, all just on here. I also just have the steering wheel unlocked in case we have to move this pitman arm and the steering box. That way nothing's kind of locked up. So we'll spray this with some PB. Alright, so with that fender liner removed, we can clearly see our 3 bolts going to our steering spacer, these 2 bottom ones, and one up here in the corner. Now these 2 bottom ones, I can easily get an impact on them, so I'm going to try zipping it out that way. This other one, we might need to put a breaker bar on it and kind of sneak it through here because we do have the front clip support that's kind of in the way. If you don't have the front bumper on, this is going to be pretty easy because you can get at it directly from the side. So these bolt heads, they're going to be a 5/8, and we'll try and take them off. These guys are on there tight. I might just have to use a breaker bar and might just end up snapping them off. Oop. That one snapped. You can see how rusty it gets, and yeah, it looks like it snapped right in that aluminum spacer. There goes that one. This one actually feels like it wants to come out. Alright, we got lucky. One out of the 3 did not break. Alright, so with all the bolts out or just broken off, you can see it's still kind of stuck in there, so I'm going to take the steering wheel, turn it a little bit, and see if we can have this pop out of place. Alright, I think that is free. Alright, move it a little bit, so we're going to try and push it this way and have it rest right here on the sway bar. So looking on the frame side of the steering box, as you can see, this is our old aluminum spacer right here. And surprisingly, it's not cracked yet, but as you can see, it's still kind of stuck onto this steering box. So we got that one upper hole removed, and you can see there is some wiggle room, so that's completely separated from the steering box. But unfortunately over here, as you can see, the bolts snapped right where they corroded inside this aluminum spacer. So what we can do to get the rest of this out is actually cut right here and here. So basically we just have these little nubs right here. Then we should be able to grab on with the vice grips and thread them out all the way. You can either cut them or you can try breaking them. I might try that first since this aluminum spacer is pretty brittle. As you can see, it just cracks easily. Good, so there goes that part, and now since these two are seized up, we'll have to split it right here as well. Alright, so now I'm going to get a vice grips and see if I can clamp onto that and break it free. If it doesn't come off easily, what we can do is take a little heat and just kind of heat up over here where the threads go into on the steering box. You just want to make sure you don't heat up your box too much because there's seals in this box and you don't want a leaking steering box once you're done with this. Alright, so as you can see, this moved a little bit just by hammering on the vice grips and after heating it up. I'm just going to keep going at it and we'll try to get these out. Alright, so we got one out. You can see how tight it was because they got some blue Loctite on these. Now we just got this upper one. Alright, and there's the last one. I think the trick to getting these out is actually to use a torch, because it kind of helps break down this Loctite that's on there, and makes it so it doesn't stick to the threads anymore. And the heat also expands the hole that's on the steering box, and you should be able to get a vice grip on there and back this off. Alright, so with that old steering spacer out, you can tell what a difference it is compared to the new one. So with this aluminum, as you saw, it's not really strong. I was able to take a pliers to it and just snap it easily, and it likes to corrode inside these bolts. And even while I'm trying to take this off, you can see part of the washer actually snapped right here, which is kind of ironic. But we got all new stuff to replace that with. I decided to go with a 3.5-inch half-inch bolt for this extra bolt that's over here that's going to be bolting to the frame. And these 3 bolts that we're going to be replacing for the steering box are 7/16 UNC. All the bolts have a lock washer and a flat washer. So the way I'm going to install this is basically start with this front hole up here. That way we can get the steering box in and up against the frame, and it's going to help line everything up, so that way we're not trying to balance the steering box and the spacer in and then trying to thread in a bolt. And also this paint is still a little tacky, so I don't want to be touching that too much. I am going to be actually using blue Loctite on these bolts, because that's how they were on the factory. So basically I'll put a little Loctite on the threaded portion on the steering box, and then I'm also going to put some anti-seize on the shank of the bolt, so that way it doesn't get seized inside the steering box spacer, as well as a sleeve that's inside the frame. And the sleeve inside of the frame actually prevents the frame from actually caving in a little bit once you tighten this all down, so that way everything is nice and straight without anything bending. So let's start off on installing the spacer, and we'll get it held in place by this 1/2-inch bolt over here. Alright, so as you can see, this is the inside of the frame rail where our steering box spacer is going to be installed. I just quickly cleaned it up so that way it doesn't contaminate the paint, since it's still kind of tacky, and that way we also get a nice flat surface for it to mount to. And if you can see back here, we have our large hole that actually goes to the frame. That's going to be our extra bolt hole that the steering box spacer is going to be bolted to. It also has a sleeve going through the frame, so we don't have to worry about the frame collapsing when we tighten that up. So I'm going to put our steering box spacer in, and then we'll get that first bolt lined up, and then tighten it up just a little bit, because we want to move it around so that way we can line up the rest of the holes. And when we install this flat part of the spacer is going to be towards the frame. Now I got my 1/2-inch bolt. I'm going to come in from inside the wheel well and line it up. Alright, so with that in there, I'm going to take the other 3 bolts for the steering box and just kind of loosely put it in, so that way we get it lined up where it's supposed to go. Alright, so now looking at the outside of the frame rail, we can see we have all of our bolts in. These 3 are just there to mock it up, so that way the steering spacer is kind of lined up where it's going to go. Now I'm just going to snug up this bolt back here. I'm not going to torque it down yet, but just tight enough so that way the spacer doesn't really move when we go and install our steering box. And this bolt head for this 1/2-inch bolt is just going to be a 3/4. Alright, so with that tightened up a little bit, I'm going to take out these bolts over here, and we're going to get some anti-seize on the shank of the bolt. And then on the steering box side, we're going to put a little bit of blue Loctite on there, so that way these things lock into place but don't seize into place. Alright, so I got Loctite on the threads over here on the steering box and some anti-seize on these bolts. I got the bolts back into place. Now comes the fun part. We got to line up the bolts with the steering box, so you might want to just take one hand, kind of lift into position, and do 1 bolt at a time. Always start them by hand, because you don't want this going on crooked and possibly stripping it out. Alright, well, the steering box is finally installed. That took me a long time to get it all lined up, because I was really worried about having the bolts cross thread, since it wouldn't be flat against the frame. So if you have a friend, definitely do that with them. One person, hold the box with 2 hands, and the other person tries to thread in the bolt. Just doing one hand on the steering box is hard, because you have to push in a couple directions, but I managed to get it after an hour or so. But I finally got them in, and now it's time to torque down the bolts. So for the 3 bolts going into the steering box, I'm going to torque those down to 70 foot-pounds, and then I'll probably just do the same with that extra 1/2-inch bolt that we have on the back. Alright, so with all the bolts torqued down to 70 foot-pounds, we're pretty much done for the spacer install. Now all we got to do is just put the fender liner back in place, as well as the engine mat. Alright guys, that's going to be a wrap for today's video. It wasn't an overcomplicated install to do. A couple things I'll note is buy some bolts beforehand, just in case they break, like how a couple of them did on mine. And have another person help you install the steering box once you get that new steering box spacer in. That way someone can have two hands on the steering box and get it nice and square to the frame while someone else threads in the bolt, because the steering box likes to move around different ways and you got to hold it in two different spots to keep it nice and square. Other than that, I'll post a link in the description below on where I found my steering box spacer. If you guys want to help support the channel, I got some out-jeeping decals you guys can purchase over on Etsy. I'll post a link in the description below on where you can find that. If you guys found this video helpful, make sure to like and subscribe to the Out-Jeeping YouTube channel to help keep these videos coming. And if you have any questions or comments, post them below and I'll be happy to answer. Until next time, I'll see you guys in the next video.